So welcome to the Grail of Truth Bible Study. We are on chapter 34 of Exodus. We're doing the ESV version, and we're on here with Sharon again this week. And this will be the last chapter for tonight's Bible study. This is the third video we've done for tonight. And if you want to participate in these Bible studies in the future, just go ahead and leave a note or a comment. We'll let you know what the time is, and you can join in as well. Ask questions and so forth, and then we do put these videos on YouTube afterward, but basically we just record voices, so don't have to worry about being on video or anything like that. It's just the voices that we record. Okay, so without further ado, we go on to Exodus 34, verse 1. The Lord said to Moses, "Cut for yourself 2 tablets of stone like the first, and I will write on the tablets the words that were on the first tablets which you broke. Be ready by the morning to come up in the morning to Mount Sinai, and present yourself there to me on top of the mountain. No one shall come up with you, and let no one be seen throughout all the mountain. Let no flocks or herds graze upon that mountain." So Moses cut 2 tablets of stone like the first, and he rose up early in the morning and went up on Mount Sinai as the Lord had commanded him, and took in his hand the 2 tablets of stone. The Lord descended in the cloud and stood with him there and proclaimed the name of the Lord. The Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love to thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and the children's children to the 3rd and 4th generation. And Moses quickly bowed his head toward the earth and worshipped. And he said, "If now I have found favor in your sight, O Lord, please let the Lord go in the midst of us, for it is a stiff-necked people, and pardon our iniquity and our sin, and take us for your inheritance." And he said, "Behold, I am making a covenant. Before all your people I will do marvels, such as have not been created in all the earth or in any nation, and all the people among whom you shall and all the people among whom you are shall see the work of the Lord, for it is an awesome thing that I will do with you. Observe what I command you this day. Behold, I will drive out before you the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Take care lest you make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land to which you go, lest it become a snare in your midst. You shall tear down the altars and break their pillars, and cut down their asherim." Those are asherim, I think that's sort of like Ashtaroth poles, but it's basically a form of idol worship. So verse 14. "For you shall worship no other God, for the Lord, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God. Lest you make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land, and when they whore after other gods and sacrifice to their gods, and you are invited, you eat his sacrifice. And you take of the daughters of and you take of their daughters for your sons, and their daughters whore after their gods, and make your sons whore after their gods. You shall not make for yourself any gods of cast metal. You shall keep a feast of unleavened bread. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread as I commanded you, at the time appointed in the month Abib, for in the month Abib you came out of Egypt. All that open the womb are mine, all your male livestock, the firstborn of the cow and sheep. The firstborn of the donkey you shall redeem, and a lamb, or if you will not redeem it, you shall break its neck. All the firstborn of your sons you shall redeem, and none shall appear before me empty-handed. 6 days you shall work, but on the 7th day you shall rest. In plowing time and in harvest you shall rest. For you shall observe the Feast of Weeks, the firstfruits of the wheat harvest, and the Feast of Ingathering at the year's end. 3 times in the year shall all your males appear before the Lord God, the God of Israel. For I will cast out nations before you, and enlarge your borders. No one shall covet your land, when you go up to appear before the Lord your God 3 times a year in the year. You shall not offer the blood of my sacrifice with anything leavened, or let the sacrifice of the feast of Passover remain until morning. The best of the firstfruits of your ground you shall bring to the house of the Lord your God. You shall not boil a young goat in its mother's milk. And the Lord said to Moses, write these words, for in accordance with these words I have made a covenant with you and with Israel. So he was there with the Lord 40 days and 40 nights. He neither ate bread nor drank water, and he wrote on the tablets the words of the covenant, the 10 Commandments. When Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hand, as he came down from the mountain, Moses did not know that the skin of his face shone, because he had been talking with God. Aaron and the people of Israel saw Moses, and behold, the skin of his face shone, and they were afraid to come near him. But Moses called to them, and Aaron and all the leaders of the congregation returned to him, and Moses talked with them. Afterward, all the people of Israel came near. He commanded them all that what the Lord had spoken to him in Mount Sinai. And when Moses had finished speaking to them, he put a veil over his face. Whenever Moses went in before the Lord to speak with him, he would remove the veil until he came out. And when he came out and told the people of Israel what he was commanded, the people of Israel would see the face of Moses, that the skin of Moses' face was shining, and Moses would put the veil over his face again until he went to speak with him. So that's Exodus 34.
Wow, that part I had never heard.
Yeah, it's so there's a lot of interesting stuff in this. You almost kind of gotta go and explain it verse by verse.
Okay, well, can you pause it for a moment?
Yes, one moment. Okay, so it's paused again, and Sharon's back, and so you had a question you were just talking about?
Iniquity, back in 7.
Verse 7. Okay, let's look at the word in Hebrew, because that'll help too. Okay, so the word is avon in Hebrew, and it renders it as punishment, fault, iniquities, mischief, or sin. Perversity, depravity, iniquity, guilt, or punishment of iniquity, consequence of a punishment of iniquity. So it's basically like guilt or sin is the gist of it. So, let's see, hang on a second here. You go back to the actual verse. So we're in verse 7. Keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of their fathers and their children and their children's children to the 3rd and 4th generation.
What does that mean?
Well, it's a couple things here. So one is it means that God's merciful, but he's also just. So in other words, he's not going to clear the guilty who are guilty. He can have mercy on people, but that doesn't mean that he's going to negate the law. So it's kind of like saying, you can get a warning if you get a speeding ticket, but that doesn't mean that speeding tickets won't be enforced. That there's just no speeding limit anymore. There's still punishment for the guilty, but you can have mercy on them. So, and then it means that God's love is far greater than his justice, because his mercy triumphs over justice. So if somebody does something wrong that places them under a generational curse, then this can affect the 3rd or 4th generation. So example is let's say that a parent goes and does some terrible things, like they rob a bank or something like that, right? And by robbing a bank, they end up going to jail, and so their kid is put in a situation where they're don't have a father in the house, or they go from foster home to foster home, and there's not a good provider, whatever it is. The sin of that parent can affect the children or their children. It can be carried on from generation to generation for a few generations. It's our sins affect other people. And so there can be curses that can like be inherited from and passed down. So like if a parent, let's say a parent is into witchcraft or something like that, and then they raise their kids and teach that to their kids, and then their kids teach to their kids. I mean, there's ways that sin can be passed on generation to generation. So, are you still there, by the way? Oh, I think we got more technical difficulties. Hang on a second. Okay, so Sharon's back after technical difficulties, and we're back in here. So, I don't know how much that you heard, but basically, there are things that can be generational sins, where the sins of someone else can affect generations after them. And I was saying, like, let's say, for example, a parent is doing witchcraft, and they raise their kids in witchcraft, and then they raise their kids in it. I mean, there's things that can be passed on from generation to generation. So I think the New Testament helps clear that up, because when Jesus dies for all our sins, then it's a way to make people into new creations and actually set us free from anything that might be a generational curse.
So Jesus dying on the cross sets us free from a generational curse?
It sets us free from all sins, including generational curses. So our own sins, or anything we may have inherited in our family. Here's an example of a generational curse. Before Adam and Eve fell in the garden, they would have lived forever. There would have been, in my opinion, no diseases. But then after they fell, the very creation of humanity became corrupted, so that diseases and like cancer and sickness and plagues and all this kind of stuff death enters into the world. And those things can be inherited. You can inherit diseases from your forefathers. So there's plenty of ways where sin really messes things up, that not only can affect your own life, but can affect the lives of people after you. Now, our flesh is not redeemable, but we can become a new creation, a new spirit, and God can do miracles where he can restore people's physical health, but more specifically, we can be freed from spiritual curses that can be handed down generation to generation, so that when someone becomes a Christian and born again, they're a new creation. They're no longer under anything, like the devil basically loses any control over that or claim over that person's life when they become a new creation. So that's kind of my take on it, or my opinion on it, but I think that's...
Okay, so it basically wipes the curse on your essence, your soul, but it doesn't take the generational curse off your body, like if there's a certain cancer in your family or something like that.
Not necessarily, yes. So there are instances where certainly God can perform miracles and heal people physically, but that's not to say that like the moment someone gets baptized, that means like, all of a sudden they're going to be free from every physical, thing that ever happened. My opinion, and this will be a debated thing in theology, my opinion is that the flesh is unredeemable. That the body we have in this world, it's doomed to die. Now that doesn't mean that God can do miracles and, for a time and a season, restore people, flesh, but unless we're here when he returns, that eventually all human beings in their flesh will die. But what happens is, in our spirit, when we're born again, we're going to live together with the Lord in a new body for all eternity. So, I don't think there is any redemption for the carnal flesh, but that doesn't mean that God can't do miracles and heal people's physical diseases and stuff like that. It's just that I don't think it's like everybody that gets born again, obviously, and baptized, they don't automatically get all their diseases cured, because I don't think the flesh is redeemed in the baptismal. It's our spiritual body that's redeemed.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if it was, that'd be the new craze. Everyone would be coming.
Yeah, for sure. So it doesn't. I don't think the Bible teaches that would be the case, and it certainly doesn't play out in real life. You don't see everybody that gets baptized automatically, like amputees start growing their arms back and stuff like that. Doesn't mean God can't do physical miracles. It just means that it's like that doesn't automatically mean everybody that baptizes is going to be cured of all diseases or something, because the flesh is not redeemable. Or at least, the verses would bear witness of that. So, but the point here is that the blessings, just like the curses can last for generations, the blessings go many generations, and it shows how much God's love outweighs his justice. So,
Going
there's
back to verse 7, though,
uh-huh.
when it says visiting the inequity of the fathers on the children and the children's children, what does that mean then?
It basically means a generational curse. It means that
Visiting.
yeah,
What is?
visiting.
What does that mean?
Uh, it let me look it up in the Hebrew here, but it kind of basically means that um you're judging that next person, or you're carrying on that curse to the next person. So let me get the exact word here because I know I'm not using that right. Pakad is the Hebrew word, so it means to punish, to appoint, to commit, to set, or to charge. So like charging that, if you think like charging on a charge account, if you owe a fine, so like you're charged with $50 speeding ticket or something like that, then it would be charging that sin to your children and your grandchildren and so forth. That curse can pass down.
Okay, so this is before Jesus then.
This is before Jesus, correct. So yeah, but you can still see examples today where, like, if parents do certain things wrong and they're raising children, they can pass on those bad things to their kids. If a parent is smoking or something like that, their kids might end up smoking. There's ways that sin can get passed on from one generation to the next. So, but again, when you become a born again Christian, that can free you from all that stuff spiritually. So, let's see here. The other thing I want to point out about this verse, so the question is, what's written on the tablets? So God tells Moses, cut these tablets, bring them up, okay? Come up to the top of the mountain. No one else is going to come up with them. Don't lay flocks, herds, or graze in the mountain. So in verse 4, Moses cuts the tablets. He goes up to Mount Sinai, and the Lord descends in a cloud, and he proclaims the name of the Lord. And then by proclaiming the name of the Lord, the name is kind of like talking about your attributes or your reputation. So like, you want to keep your name clean. That doesn't mean that you want to make sure that, you don't get any dirt on your signature or something like that. If you have a clean name, it means you want to have a good reputation. So it's kind of like what it's talking about when it's talking about the name of the Lord. And so that's why it goes on to say that he proclaims that, he's merciful, he's gracious, he's slow to anger, abounding with steadfast love and faithfulness. So he kind of is talking about who he is, and he's revealing his attributes. That his love is greater than his anger. Because if it was the case of anger, he could have just wiped out the nation of Israel. But he had mercy on them because his mercy is greater than his wrath, than his justice. Even though Israel would have deserved it because they broke their covenant, and that's what they had agreed to, is that they had pledged their lives to keep this covenant, God still had mercy and didn't wipe them out. So as we continue on here, and actually I think it's mercy on Moses too, because like I said, I think part of that whole scenario was about mercy on Moses and redeeming him after the fact that he had originally, earlier in life, been a murderer and killing an Egyptian. So Moses quickly bowed his head toward the earth in worship, and then it says, if I found favor in your sight, please go in the midst of us, for the people are stiff-necked people, and pardon our iniquity and our sin, and take us for your inheritance. So again, Moses is trying to restore that relationship and praying that God would forgive the sins of Israel. And then basically God is like restoring and remaking a covenant with them by doing the whole Ten Commandments a second time. So he says, behold, I am making a covenant before all of the people. I will do marvels such as have not been created in all the earth or in any nation, and all the people among you who shall see the work of the Lord, for it is an awesome thing that I will do with you. Okay. And he said, observe what I command you this day. Behold, I will drive out before you basically all the pagan tribes that are living in the land of Canaan. So take care lest you make a covenant with the inhabitants. So he's saying, when you go into the land, don't get mixed up in their pagan religions, is essentially what he's saying. He's saying, cut down their altars, their idols, and everything else, wipe them out, but don't get messed up with them. Don't like let your sons marry their daughters and then your sons start getting involved in their religion and get drawn away from God. So he's setting up all these rules. Unless you make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land. Okay. You should not make any more gods cast out of metal. I don't know if you notice this here, but the things that are being read here are not the original 10 Commandments that were given earlier.
Right.
So that's kind of a question that some people have. They say, okay, if you look in verse 1, he says, cut for yourself 2 tablets of stone, and I will write on the tablets the words that were on the first tablets which you broke. So that's the original 10 Commandments. You know, I'm Lord your God, have no gods before me. I'm Lord the God brought you out of Egypt, have no gods before me. Don't make for yourself idols, honor your father and mother, keep the Sabbath, all that kind of stuff. Thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not commit murder. So if he's saying cut for yourself these tablets on the stone, and I will write on the tablets the words that were on the first tablets, then obviously he must be writing what was originally written with the 10 Commandments. So then what's all this stuff here? Is this additional stuff that he's also writing, or is this in place of the 10 Commandments? Or is this kind of like another way to explain the 10 Commandments? So that's kind of an interesting question that some people have. But I think what's going on here is God had the first original commandments written, and then this is something that he's having Moses explain to the people. Because it's, let's see. Where is it here? And when Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hand, he came down from the mountain. Let's go to verse... where is it here? Actually, let's back it up here. Let's look at verse 27. Okay. And the Lord said to Moses, write these words, for in accordance with these words I have made a covenant with you and with Israel. So I don't know if these are additional things that are written on the tablets that kind of greater explain the original 10 Commandments, or if these are in place of it. It would seem to me that he definitely wrote what was on the original tablets, which was the original 10 Commandments. So I don't know if this is written separately, or if he's talking about 2 different things here, but all this stuff that he's just explained is not the same original 10 Commandments. So there's something definitely going on here.
You told me before that Moses wrote down most of these original chapters, so maybe he's telling, make sure you add this in your writing.
It very well could be, because the first 5 books of the Bible were all written by Moses, with the exception that Joshua basically finished up Deuteronomy at the end, the last book. But so that's possible too. He might be writing this down separately. And it says, write these words, for in accordance with these words I have made a covenant with you in Israel. So it could be that he's writing these words, that this is like a commandment of writing in the Torah, in the scrolls and so forth, and maybe not necessarily on the tablets. That's another possibility. And also, let's see here. Where's the part where he speaks to the people? It says, when Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hand, as he came down from the mountain, Moses did not know that the skin of his face was shining. Okay. And they couldn't handle the light coming off his face, so he had to wear a veil. And Moses called to them and Aaron and the leaders of the congregation and returned them, and Moses talked with them. Afterward all the people of Israel came near, and he commanded them all that the Lord had spoken him in Mount Sinai. So the other thing is, this could be like, supplemental information that's being given to Moses in addition to the original 10 Commandments that he has to explain to the people. But I don't think there's some people look at this and they say, oh, it's a contradiction. You got one set of 10 Commandments earlier, and then in chapter 34 you got a whole other set. I don't think when you go through it line by line that you can make that case, because he said right in the beginning, I will write on the words that were on the first tablet. So we know what those words were from earlier in the book. So obviously what was originally written, the 10 Commandments, that's what was put on the tablet. Obey your father and your mother, or honor your father and your mother, love the Lord God with not that's a different verse. I'm sorry.
What I get out of it is it sounds like he's just basically re-summarizing the whole covenant he's made with them, the 10 Commandments, the feasts, and all that. It sounds like he's re-summarizing it so they're clear, I'm holding you responsible for these things.
Yes, I think that's a good interpretation of it. What is your little the summary that you clip out and you cut and paste? What does that one say?
God instructs Moses to cut 2 more tablets of stone and come up to Sinai again, so the testimony can be rewritten. The Lord's name is proclaimed. He will visit the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the 3rd and 4th generations. God reaffirms his covenant with Israel, but warns Israel that they must be separate from the Canaanites in worship, politics, fellowship, and marriage. 3 festivals stipulated: unleavened bread, weeks, and ingathering. All men should appear before the Lord for these festivals. Moses is with the Lord 40 days and 40 nights. New stone tablets are created. Moses' face shines when he comes down, so he veils himself. Whenever he speaks to the Lord, he takes off the veil and his face shines again. He replaces the veil when he has finished talking.
Okay. Yeah, I don't see any contradiction. I don't see it enough that you could say that. So, like right now, I've got an article from Wikipedia on the screen where I've got the original 10 Commandments: "Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make any graven image," and so forth. I don't think people that try to make the case that this is a new set of 10 Commandments, I don't think that's a valid case. I think he's explaining additional things, or he's rehashing the covenant, as you say, but I don't think it's contradictory to those original 10 Commandments that were given, I think, in chapter 20, I want to say. Because, again, he says right away in the first verse that write on the tablets the words which were on the first set. So, obviously, the words that were on the first set made it onto this set of tablets as well. So, I don't see a contradiction when people try to bring that up. But what would be interesting is to go by these things kind of line by line. And I don't know if I want to do that in this video, but maybe I'll do it in another video. This is hypotheses that I have not checked out yet, but I wonder if you could make a case that each of these things that God is saying is talking about one of the original 10 Commandments. So like in verse 17, you should not make for yourself any gods of cast metal. Well, that could be explaining the second commandment: you shall not make unto you any graven image, So I wonder if in a way you could go through line by line and kind of see how these things connect to the original 10 Commandments. So maybe it's just like
examples.
Yeah, like supplementing these things. So some of the things they wouldn't seem to connect, like talking about the feasts, but I wonder if there's, a deeper hidden thing behind them. So I don't know. I'll have to do. I don't know if I want to do that in this video because I'd like to explore it, because that hypothesis could be completely wrong. But I would like to check that out at some point and see if there's a way that those would match up. So I do want to take a look at these real quick just to kind of make sure we got a good understanding of them, what he does say. So let's see. Let's start with we'll start with verse 10. Behold, I am making you a covenant before all the people. I do marvels. So he's going to do some great miracles. And the people will see it, and it's going to be an awesome thing. And he says in verse 11, observe what I command you this day. Behold, I will drive out all the Canaanites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, Jebusites, all those people. So that's kind of interesting. The first part is, I'm the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Now he's saying, like, I'm going to bring you into the land of Canaan and drive out those people before you. It says, take care lest you make a covenant with the inhabitants. Yeah, the original commandment says, don't have any other gods before me, And that says, you shall tear down the altars and break their pillars and cut down their asherim. Those are poles to Ashtaroth. Ashtaroth, or Astarte, was a female Canaanite goddess. And she takes on many names throughout history, like the Queen of Heaven and stuff like that. A lot of people, some people believe that when Catholics are involved in the worship of Mary, that actually derives from this Canaanite goddess of Ashtaroth. So that's an argument amongst many Protestants against Catholics, that they think that they're actually carrying on a Babylonian type tradition with that. So that's, but and that's for a whole other discussion. But for the case of Asherim, as being described in this verse here, it's a type of female pagan deity, and they would have I think Asher poles or something they're called, but it's kind of like Mayday poles. I don't know if you ever see a Mayday pole where they do the ribbon thing around it. I think that's similar to that.
Oh.
Yeah, but that's one I'll have to look up a little bit more. Actually, let me look at the Hebrew on that one real quick here too.
Interesting.
Okay, I'll say that for another time. Shall not worship any other god. Okay, that's verse 15. Don't make a covenant. Don't exchange your sons and daughters in marriages that will lead to them getting involved in other religions, basically. Don't make idols. So you keep the feast of unleavened bread. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread in the month of Abib. Abib is called Nisan. That originally in ancient times it was called Abib. Let's see. All the firstborn belong to God, and they need to be redeemed. Otherwise, you have to. Well, it says break their neck. I think it means basically killing them humanely, like cutting the carotid artery and then letting the blood drain out. Because when they would have to kill animals in ancient times for food or sacrifice, they would have to do it in the most painless way possible. So I think that's what it means by breaking the neck here.
I can't remember how you redeem the firstborn.
Well, it explains right here in verse 20. It says, the firstborn of the donkey you shall redeem.
No, the children.
Oh, I think you do it with a lamb or livestock. I'd have to go back and look at that one. I don't know if there's a way with money. I think there might even be a way, like a temple token or something with money. But I'd have to go back and look at that one. I don't recall that one. So, but it's either a sacrifice or money, most likely. So
it's just a rehashing right now, anyway, right?
Yeah, basically. So 6 days you work. So there's the Sabbath day. In plowing time and harvest you shall rest. Okay, so you keep the Sabbath. Keep the Feast of Weeks. That's Pentecost. That's 49 days after Passover or the Feast of First Fruits. And then the Feast of Ingathering. That's Sukkot. That's the one with you make the little hut. The booth. Feast of Booths. So that's at the year's end. That's at the time of the harvest. And that's the holiday that Gentiles can go to. So
that's what?
That's the holiday that Gentiles can attend, not just Jews in ancient times. A Gentile could go to the Feast of Booths. So in verse 23 it says, 3 times a year you shall all your males appear before the Lord your God of Israel. So what happens is there's more than one holiday in Israel, but those 3, which is unleavened bread, Passover, which is kind of like one thing because it's all kind of at the same time. The second one is Pentecost or Shavuot. That's the 49 days later one. And then the last one is the Sukkot or the Feast of Booths. Those 3 holidays, all the males would have to show up for. So in ancient times, they would all have to go to Jerusalem 3 times a year, once for each of those holidays, and show and bring sacrifices and stuff to God in the temple. So that's one of the requirements. And God set this requirement down before they even had a capital of Jerusalem. So this is something that they're going to have to do every year. They're going to have to appear before the Lord 3 times. Okay, so 24 is going to cast out the nations before you and enlarge your borders. No one shall covet your land. You shall go up and appear before the Lord 3 times a year, which we just discussed. You shall not offer the blood of my sacrifice with anything leavened. So no, puffy, fluffed up wheat products. Nothing with leavening in it, which isn't yeast itself; it's the fermentation of yeast. And let the sacrifice of the feast of Passover remain until morning. So when they kill the lamb for the Passover and eat it, they can't leave it till morning. They have to burn it with ashes, burn it to ashes, so that there's nothing left by morning. The best of the first fruits of the ground you shall bring to the house of the Lord your God. You shall not. Okay, so you always give, when you're giving the offering, the best of your first fruits, like you grow crops in the field. When the crops are ready for harvest, you take the very first and the very best of them and give as an offering for the service of the Lord. Okay, and then you get to keep what's rest. You don't take the worst. You don't find the crops that are kind of like got some problems with it and give those to God. You give them the first and the best, and then you get to keep everything after that. Now this one here, this is where in Judaism they get that you don't eat dairy products with meat products. It says, you shall not boil a young goat in its mother's milk. And so the thing is, that was actually a pagan practice in that day, that they were doing a pagan religious ritual where they would boil a goat in its mother's milk. But also along with that, it's an object lesson where it teaches humanity, because it's bad enough that a mama goat, in my opinion, is going to lose her kid to become a meal on someone's plate, but then you don't turn around and use the very milk that she's producing to give life to her young and use that as the instrument of cooking her young, So it's teaching, I think, civility and humanity by not boiling a young sheep or young kid in its mother's milk, a young goat or whatever, So, so that, I think, is the essence behind it. But in modern Judaism, they don't have any kind of dairy associated with any kind of meat if you're keeping strict kosher. So, verse 27, and the Lord said to Moses, write these words in accordance. Okay, so that's kind of, we just went through them all. And then, of course, when he comes down, his face is shining where they can't even look upon him. So he's got to wear a veil. And that's the thing. When you get really close to the holiness of God, if you're out of a state of grace, if you have sin on you, you can't really come into the presence of God. And that's what the death of Jesus on the cross and being covered in his blood does. It allows us to come back into the presence of God. Because outside of that, we can't handle the light and the holiness of God. It's too much for us. In fact, it would probably destroy us. So, so that is chapter 34. Do you have any questions on it?
No.
Okay. Well, then we are getting close to the end of Exodus here, 5 more chapters. So I'll go ahead and wrap up this video. I appreciate everyone who listened to this video. And of course, please like, subscribe, and comment if you have any questions. And we look forward to seeing you in the next video. If you want to participate in these Bible studies, just let us know in a comment, and we'll let you know when they are. And we look forward to seeing you in the future. All right. Thank you.